Greetings, all. What a fascinating case conference about John. Um, one theme that was very clear in your discussion relates to the importance of understanding behavior, understanding what sense a behavior makes in ecosystemic context. As we've discussed, a given behavior is not necessarily productive, but it always makes sense. And very often behaviors that are problematic were attempted solutions at one point. As Jenny points out, there are reasons for homelessness, for John's homelessness. There possible reasons beyond what he describes as just being kicked out because he parties too much. Jenny points out PTSD as a possibility, and it could be as simple as not being able to fill out a form with a previous mailing address, or not being able to have a reference of a previous landlord, or simply not having the money to pay for housing. And as Katie points out, some people are homeless for no other reason than survival. And some people use drugs when they're homeless for survival purposes. Drugs, as you say, drugs like meth can keep you awake and alert at night when danger increases. And heroin and alcohol and tobacco can help with anxiety and depression. These are both wonderful insights into the ways that behavior or a person's choices make sense in ecosystemic context. Another theme in your conversation was the importance of humor and the usefulness of humor in joining with clients. I have found this very often in my own experience. Poking fun at yourself, as you point out, and Tara, with your example of your smelly hat, making fun of yourself conveys humility and levels the playing field. As Mariah points out, it shows that you are a genuine human being and want to help. I learned early on that when I made a mistake or did something silly, something as small as dropping my papers, it was an opportunity to poke fun at myself and thereby cut through the tension in the session and convey that I wasn't standing on a professional pedestal, but rather that I was on an equal basis and part of the club of human beings with foibles. Another theme that was clear in your conversation was the importance of respectfulness and deference to clients, and I was so delighted to see that. As you point out, one of the reasons the real John and I have a good relationship, I think, is because I did nothing but just answer his questions, was polite, and offered him food and coffee for months. That's such a wonderful example of understanding where the client is and respecting that, and entering the client's world as a respectful guest. You discuss the power of conveying hope and admiration. Several of you talked about how admirable John was in a variety of ways. Michelle and Kayla and others talked about the importance of a client having control over the process. And as Anthony points out, your mentor saying, my mentor told me that therapy is 85% the client and 15% the counselor. And that is so very true. You had general agreement that housing was the first priority. And Katie points out that that can really be a challenge if it has been a long, long time since the client had stable housing, because it is a new condition, a new situation that in itself can provoke an anxiety. Several of you discussed the challenge of being in a rural area. And Tara points out that taking a trauma-informed approach to working with John makes good sense. As you put it, ultimately with trauma, it's important to let the client take you where they're ready to go and have choice whenever they whether they reveal and how they talk about their trauma. I would not want to induce any further trauma by asking a person to relive traumatic events unless the person wanted to. Trauma-informed practice understands that the external circumstances a person is experiencing are very indicative of past trauma, and that focusing on these things and empowerment with those might be more helpful than focusing on the trauma itself. And that is that's a critical component of trauma-informed care and a very important point. Chela and others pointed to the usefulness of a harm reduction approach in this case. And several of you discussed the importance of social connection and social support. William suggests sharing his artistic talents. And several of you discussed the importance of getting John's perspective regarding his current situation and his desired situation. Jose and Jennifer point to this particularly. Don't stop at surface explanations. And several of you discussed the usefulness of mapping out the steps once your client has identified where he wants to be. Myra also underscored the importance of giving the power of the change process, giving the power to John himself, and how important that is with regard to his own motivation. If it's your ship, you're much more likely to be invested in learning how to sail it and learning how to navigate. Joanne makes the important point that it's critical to discuss with a client the fact that the change process is difficult and may take time. And Lisa and Ryan point to the usefulness of making a timeline. Myra points out how important it would be to involve people in the community who can offer John guidance. For example, elders who may assist him with traditional ways of healing and expressing himself. Lisa and Ryan and Jennifer talk about, and William talk about, the importance of incorporating his art, his very considerable creativity into the change process. One thing that occurred to me is that several towns have an art collective where people can go and create art independent of their living situation. In Eureka, there is such an art studio, and in Arcata, there is a pottery studio where people can come. And Michelle points to the importance of creating coping strategies and leaving the session with something that is immediately usable, applicable. For example, a plan for dealing with anxiety related to engaging in counseling, for example. Anthony and India make the important point that motivational interviewing is a very appropriate approach in this case. For example, addressing his reluctance to engaging with the VA. It's also very important to acknowledge his perspective related to racism. And my own point of view is that if it looks like racism and it smells like racism, it probably is racism. And it's very important to appreciate and acknowledge and validate a person's experience. William talks about the mystery of resiliency. And I submit that it is actually not that mysterious. That as we've discussed, resilience is an outcome that is related to the balance of risk and protective factors on multiple systemic levels at a particular time, and it's possible to systematically analyze those and ratchet up the protective factors and mitigate the risk factors. So I submit to you the importance of understanding that resilience is not something magical, but it's an outcome that can very well be achieved, and that you as a professional helper can assist a client in achieving. Once again, a wonderful conversation, and you are becoming a very thoughtful, grounded team of colleagues as you engage in this case conference experience. And this is a foundation that you will be able to draw upon throughout your career. So I appreciate the level of investment that each of you is engaging in. Well done.